Hello Tea Cats, Dylan here from Moo Mountain Tea. In the final chapter of the masterclass here, we are discussing the current issues and problems in the tea industry today and issues that we are going to have to navigate around and through as the tea industry progresses into the future. This chapter is absolutely critical to anyone who really cares about the tea industry and wants to see this thing flourish into the best version of itself in the future. As we mentioned in chapter 7, this is a thousands of years old tradition, and the responsibility is on our shoulders currently to pass this great tradition down to the generations of tea drinkers that will follow us. There are some serious issues in the tea industry that we must address currently. So as we've done with every chapter, I want to kick things off with the one sentence summary of all of the content of chapter 8. So here is our one sentence summary. Some modern tea industry practices inflict unnecessary harm on environmental and human health due to outdated farm machinery, needless material packaging, and agrochemical over applications, which fortunately are all problems entirely soluble through improved agricultural practices and heightened consumer awareness. So next, we break the sentence down, dissect each and every detail, and then just cannonball you right out of this video with a crystal clear, rock solid understanding of today's current issues in the tea industry.
会把这个传统茶文化带回去美国，在那边推广一下。
So in this chapter about tea industry problems, we are going right after the heavy hitters. There are some small little areas of argumentation in the tea industry today, like is raw pu'erh a dark tea or is it more classified as a green tea technically? These problems have their own time and place to be addressed, but we don't have time in this video to go through each and every one of these little eeny-weeny problems, but rather I want to keep the focus on the most critical issues facing us today, which pertain directly to environmental and human health. So let's start on the environmental side. With environmental problems, there are two subcategories that you can use to understand the effects of tea industry processes on the environment. And those two categories are carbon and nitrogen. So we'll start with carbon. This is the classic carbon emissions conversation that we as a society have been having for decades now. What is the carbon footprint of tea? And what areas within the tea industry can we help reduce that carbon footprint? If you want to study the total carbon footprint of anything, whether it's this teapot here, or my shirt, or my phone, or a cup of tea, you can conduct what's called a life cycle assessment. And basically, these life cycle assessments track the whole production and consumption process of that item from cradle to grave, as they call it. So from its very creation to when it is consumed and used by the final consumer. You can track every step along the way there and see what is the relative carbon footprint of each step. Then you add them all up, and that's the total CO2 or carbon emitted by that single product. So in 2019, there was a great study that did a life cycle assessment of tea, and they used two different types of tea products. They used 1 kilogram of dry tea leaves that started from cradle to supermarket gate. So it's growing, processing, transportation, right to the point that it gets to the supermarket. That's where they stopped that one. And the second product was a cup of fully prepared tea, the actual liquid that you are consuming in a cup of tea. It was 1 cup's worth, but they took that one from cradle all the way to grave, being down the hatch. So what did they find? Basically, they identified the major carbon emitter hotspots within the 1 kilogram of tea to be the tea cultivation, right? The farming aspect, the tea processing, and then the packaging material. That second tea product, which is the cup of infused tea, surprisingly, the major carbon emitting hotspot in that process was the heating of the water when you are preparing the tea. Bringing water from a cold temperature to a roaring boil, that step was the most energy intensive and therefore most carbon emitting step in the entire cradle to grave process of that cup of tea. So it was an interesting finding. I think it helped me see how my actions as an individual tea consumer really can add up over a lifetime of tea consumption. So let's look at a couple of these carbon emitting hotspots within the process of tea production and consumption and talk about what we might be able to do to reduce those levels of emissions into the atmosphere. Guys, I've been to so many tea operations that still heat the tea equipment. They still heat the woks and the iron drums used for tea fixing using heat that comes from burning firewood. I mean, this is the worst possible option. And we could easily, and I've seen these machines, we could easily just use electric machinery in these tea processing operations. There is an easy solution with that problem right there. So another big one, if you'll remember, was packaging. Now, this is kind of a bigger issue in China, but it's a big issue here too. In China, they have this really cool gift-giving tradition where when you show up as a guest at someone's house, you bring a gift. In the West, we might bring a bottle of wine or something, but in China, they like to get these really ornate gifts. And a lot of times that's tea. And the thing is, when you're giving a gift in Chinese culture, the bigger, more elaborate, fancy packaging kind of indicates that it's a higher quality, nicer gift. So you end up seeing these nice teas, maybe like 50 grams or less sometimes, of really nice tea packaged in like this much cardboard and glass and metal. And it's kind of gone over the top in the last decade or so. And the solution to this problem is so simple, and it just comes from increased consumer awareness and shifting our demand away from these really ornate packages. I know if someone was giving me a gift of tea, I would actually prefer that they use the most minimalist, least environmentally damaging packaging that they could get their hands on, right? That's what I literally prefer as the recipient of that gift. Also, obviously, in the future, using recycled materials or biodegradable materials would be a huge step in reducing the carbon footprint. All right, so let's get that last hotspot, which was heating the water. This is probably the number one way that someone who's an everyday consumer of tea can help reduce the carbon footprint of tea. And basically, what I would recommend is just getting yourself the most energy efficient electric tea kettle for heating the water that you can get. That'll be a big contribution. And then also just only heating up the amount of water that you need. I'm as guilty of this as anyone else. And sometimes if I'll just steep this once or twice, I'll heat up like a liter of cold water to a boil. I'll infuse it once and then it'll cool down, then I'll heat it up again. I mean, that's so wasteful. If I just think ahead of time, how much water do I actually need right now? So much waste can be avoided in that process right there. Okay, so those are a couple of the big hotspots for carbon emissions within the tea production and consumption process. Now let's focus on that second category of environmental pollution within the tea industry, which is nitrogen-based pollution. Now this one is definitely lesser known than carbon-based pollution, but in the context of tea, it actually is a much more important issue. So you'll remember from chapter 2 that tea is a fairly nitrogen thirsty plant, and that tea plants absorb nitrogen through their roots from the soil environment. They convert it into L-theanine, which is the big nitrogen transport unit within tea plants, and then we use that theanine to make catechins, other amino acids, etc. That L-theanine and the savory qualities of it is what directly corresponds to tea quality. Right? You'll remember that from chapters 4 and 5. So what you see in the tea industry is huge applications of inorganic nitrogen fertilizers to tea fields so that the farmers can basically improve and enhance the theanine content in the leaves as much as possible. That gives more umami qualities to the tea, and at the end of the day, they get a higher price tag for those teas. So there's huge incentive to make sure that there's enough nitrogen in the soil when cultivating tea. But what happens when you apply too much nitrogen fertilizer to the tea fields is that basically only 30% of that inorganic nitrogen fertilizer is getting even taken up by the tea plants. The other 70%, it gets nitrified and oxidized into nitrates that leaches through the soil into the groundwater, where it reduces back into nitrites. That enters the drinking water of the surrounding community, and nitrites are terrible for human health, basically. So some of that end fertilizer ends up as nitrites in the drinking water, which is bad. And another huge chunk of that nitrogen fertilizer, after nitrification, it then reduces and forms nitrous oxide gas, which is a gaseous form of nitrogen, which then evaporates, volatilizes, and enters the atmosphere. In the atmosphere, nitrous oxide functions as one of the most potent greenhouse gases that we know of. There's a lot of talk recently about how methane is worse of a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. That's true. Methane's about 30 times worse, 30 times more potent of a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide is. Well, guess what? Nitrous oxide is 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide is as a greenhouse gas. So it's 100 times more potent than methane. And tea fields in particular, especially the tea fields that are applying tons of these inorganic and fertilizers, have been identified in so many researches now as hotspots of nitrous oxide emission into the atmosphere. Right? This honestly is probably the most important and least talked about impact of the tea industry on the environment. So that is just an extremely alarming and massive problem that we need to fix. So with this nitrogen pollution issue, how do we fix it? Well, basically we need to stop applying so much inorganic nitrogen fertilizer. And a great way that we can do that is by converting to organic cultivation practices. When we use organic nitrogen fertilizers, which most of the time just looks like manure, right? When we start using these and not these inorganic nitrogen pellets, then we have way less conversion to nitrates, way less leaching into the groundwater and drinking water, and way less volatilization into nitrous oxide, and then way less emission into the atmosphere. So basically, if you want to stop the over application of these inorganic nitrogen fertilizers and support the use of more sustainable fertilization practices, then just buy organic. That's the number one thing that we can do currently. Now, the organic system is far from perfect. We have more improvements to make organic more accessible to small scale farmers and to make it more optimized on its own, right? And I'm working on that currently in my research, and a lot of other researchers are, which is great. But in the meantime, until we fine tune things and get it perfect, the best thing that you can do as an everyday tea consumer is just buy organic. So if we switch to organic farming, basically those end pollution issues just are not issues anymore. It's all coming from the over application, the excess application of these inorganic nitrogen fertilizers. You know, I wanted to keep this conversation to carbon and nitrogen because those are the big ones, but the same thing applies for phosphorus fertilizers too. The lake that I was born and raised on in upstate New York has seen these massive algae blooms in recent years, which is the direct product of phosphorus fertilizers in the watershed in the surrounding area, running off of the fields and going into the lake water, where they can cause algae blooms at parts per billion within the water. So there's huge issues with phosphorus fertilization too. I don't want to get into that right now, but these fertilizer over application issues are entirely soluble through transition to more sustainable agricultural practices. And right now, the best thing we got going for us is organic. So support organic, buy organic when you can. So that basically brings the environmental side of things to a close. In quick summation, let's electrify the farm vehicles, let's electrify the tea processing equipment, let's be smart about how much water we're boiling and how we're boiling that water, right? Electrify the tea kettles. Stop over applying fertilizers, buy organic tea if you can. Now let's pivot into the human side of things. So what are the issues of interest when it comes to the potential impacts of the tea industry, whether it's production or consumption, on human health? Within this human health part of the chapter, I have two categories. The first one is the use of pest control agrochemicals, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides. These are used on non-organic certified tea operations to kill bugs, to kill fungi, and to kill weeds, and they should not be in our bodies whatsoever. I mean, there are quote unquote thresholds established by the FDA and the USDA where under a certain limit, it doesn't cause harm, but I don't really trust those numbers. And the thing is, these things can accumulate over time, especially in adipose tissue, right, in fat tissue in your body. So it accumulates at different levels for different people. Basically, the closer you can get to zero of these toxins in your body, the better. That's how I view it. So similar to the fertilizer issue, buying organic is the best way to guarantee that you're not getting any levels of these chemicals in your tea. Again, though, that's not to say that all non-organic certified teas have quantities of these chemicals that should worry you. But at the same time, the more organic you can buy, the better. Or if it's not certified, just be sourcing it from someone that you trust, right? Have it coming from a source where you know the person sourcing it or growing the tea really cares deeply about this issue, and it has crossed their T's and dotted their I's in terms of making sure that these agrochemicals were not applied in the production process whatsoever. And there's been so much exciting research in the last decade, like just in the last few years, about really innovative new sustainable farming practices that actually eliminate the need for these chemicals entirely. It takes a lot of ingenuity and innovation, and it's not easy. And you have to like work with these really complex ecodynamics and a complex ecosystem, but we are starting to figure it out. And it's so exciting when you see a new sustainable farming method implemented, working, reducing the amount of yield and quality loss to these pests, and doing all of it without any chemical applications. It's happening more and more and more all the time. And I think it's the most exciting area within tea science research. That's personally what I spend my time researching now. So I can promise you guys that when we are switching to organic tea cultivation and we stop using these agrochemicals, that it's not like we're guaranteed to lose a ton of quality and yield in our tea. It's actually the reverse. If we can figure it out and optimize these systems, then we're gonna get better yields, better qualities, and we're gonna do it for a lower price. Because these agrochemicals cost a lot of money, and there's a lot of industries, a lot of big companies making a lot of money off these things, and they don't want to hear me saying the things that I'm saying to you right now. But I promise you, all of the research that I have reviewed and conducted myself suggests in a matter of time, we will not even be using these chemicals whatsoever. Much more to come on this topic, I promise you that. So that's basically the thing for this one. Yeah, for now, just buy organic when you can, or buy from a very trusted source. So the second human health related issue is regarding tea bags. Those plastic or nylon tea bags that you see all over the place now, don't use those. There was a study that came out last year that showed that when you use water temperatures above 95 Celsius, you have the flaking and splintering off of microplastics coming from these materials into the tea. The tea bag disintegrates to a small degree in the hot water. You have plastics and these industrial chemicals essentially coming off the tea bags and getting into your body as you just literally drink it with the tea. It was one of the most disturbing studies I've ever read. And the thing is, this, of all the problems we've talked about, is the most avoidable. Just don't use the tea bag. Guys, I'm not even saying that you have to take all your tea bag tea that you've already bought and throw it out. Just cut the thing open with a pair of scissors, dump the tea out, and then throw away the tea bag. You don't need it. And there's so many easy tea infusion methods where you don't use these things at all, right? Use a tea tumbler, use a teapot, use a gaiwan, put your tea in a glass and add hot water to it, right? These things shouldn't even exist. They were invented by accident. I think there was like 100 years ago, right? Someone was sending a sample of tea in the mail to somebody else. They sent it in like a paper bag, and then the person who received the tea sample had never drank tea before. They didn't know what to do with it, and they just took the whole package of tea that the sample is in and stuck it and put it in the hot water, and there you have the first tea bag, right? It was never intended to exist. It shouldn't exist. You know, when you go to the store and buy your vegetables, when you come home and saute the broccoli, do you put the whole bag with the broccoli in there in the thing and saute it? No, you don't. That's crazy. Take the tea out of its packaging before you consume it. Pretty simple. I'm starting to realize that chapter 8 is kind of like my ranting chapter here, which is a great way to finish this whole masterclass, I think, with a bit of ranting. Basically, those are the two things that I identified as major potential hazards to human health. But again, like the problems to with environmental health, entirely avoidable and soluble through technologies and information that we have today. It's just a matter of getting people to do the right thing and implement these solutions. And that, at the end of the day, comes from consumer awareness. How are you gonna change things if you don't even know there's a problem? That is my little spiel, right? This is my ranting spiel. It won't be my last, I can guarantee that. But those are the big issues of the tea industry. Like I said, there's some little other eeny-weeny issues that people like to bicker about on Twitter or whatever. You know, maybe I'll get to those eventually. If there's other issues that you've heard about that you would like me to discuss in the future, put it in the comment section. I'm very eager to hear your thoughts and your opinions about this greater topic in general. That is it for chapter 8, and that is it for this entire masterclass. If you have sat with me through all these chapters, congratulations. Here is your diploma in tea knowledge. You know more about tea than 99.99999% of humans walking around this planet right now, and you have the basic skills and knowledge for a whole lifetime of tea enjoyment. We have more to build upon in the future, but that's what I'm here for. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. Plenty more tea videos coming about all these topics, and ones that you want me to touch on more, again, put it in the comments and let me know. That's how I get feedback from you. While you're down there, by the way, give me a like, give me a subscribe. There's a lot of ways you can support Wu Mountain Tea, but more than anything else, until the next video, stay healthy, stay positive, and keep sipping tea. One love.